At Kuala Lumpur International Airport, the night of March 8, 2014 began like any other. Inside one of the world's busiest terminals, a Boeing 777 prepared for departure. This was Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, a routine overnight journey from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. On board were 227 passengers, 10 crew members, and 2 pilots, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah and First Officer Fariq Abdul Hamid. Both men were highly experienced and respected in their profession. The aircraft itself was in perfect working order, the weather was calm, and the skies were clear. Everything about this flight seemed ordinary. No one could have imagined that within an hour it would become one of the greatest mysteries in modern history. Flight 370 took off at exactly 12:42 a.m., climbing steadily toward its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet as it crossed over the South China Sea. Passengers settled in for the overnight flight, the cabin lights dimmed, and the hum of the engines filled the silence. At 1:19 a.m., as the aircraft approached Vietnamese airspace, air traffic control in Kuala Lumpur made routine contact with the crew. The controller instructed the captain to switch frequencies and contact Ho Chi Minh. The reply came calmly, "Good night, Malaysian 370. Those 7 words would be the last anyone ever heard from Flight 370. Less than 2 minutes later, the aircraft disappeared from radar. The signal blinked off screens in Kuala Lumpur, Ho Chi Minh, and Bangkok all at once. There was no distress call, no warning, and no indication of trouble. The transponders, which send identification signals to radar systems, had stopped transmitting. This could have been caused by a catastrophic technical failure, or someone on board may have turned them off deliberately. Attempts to contact the flight failed repeatedly, and what began as a small communication concern soon turned into growing confusion and disbelief. Hours passed. The plane failed to appear on any radar, and Beijing's airport, expecting its arrival at dawn, waited in vain. When Flight 370 never landed, Malaysia Airlines issued a statement no one wanted to hear. The aircraft was missing. Families of passengers began gathering in airports, desperate for information, while search and rescue teams were mobilized. What followed was the largest and most expensive search operation in aviation history. Ships and aircraft scoured the South China Sea and the Gulf of Thailand, searching for debris or any sign of wreckage, but the ocean gave nothing back. No oil slick, no floating metal, no signal from the aircraft's emergency beacon. It was as if the Boeing 777 had vanished into thin air. Days later, a revelation changed the entire course of the investigation. Malaysian military radar data revealed that moments after it vanished from civilian radar, the plane had not crashed. It had turned sharply to the west, flown back across the Malaysian peninsula, and continued heading northwest. This discovery meant that the disappearance wasn't random or instantaneous, it was deliberate. Someone had changed the course of the flight and kept it flying for hours. In a world where every aircraft is tracked, monitored, and logged, an enormous passenger jet had managed to escape without leaving a single trace behind. Flight 370 had crossed the line between fact and mystery. What started as a routine overnight journey had now become one of the most haunting, unsolved events in aviation history. A flight that didn't just go missing, but seemed to dissolve into the sky itself. As the hours turned into days, the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 evolved from a tragedy into a global enigma. With no distress call and no wreckage found in the South China Sea, authorities expanded the search zone. What began as a focused operation soon turned into one of the largest and most expensive searches in aviation history, spanning vast stretches of ocean and involving multiple nations. More than 24 countries joined the effort, deploying aircraft, naval ships, and satellites. Yet, despite the scale of the mission, there was still nothing. The ocean remained silent. Then came a breakthrough that changed the investigation entirely. Malaysian military radar data, reviewed days after the disappearance, revealed something extraordinary. Instead of continuing toward Vietnam, Flight 370 had deviated sharply from its planned route. It turned west, crossed the Malay Peninsula, and flew directly over the Strait of Malacca. This maneuver wasn't random, it was controlled. Whoever was flying the aircraft knew exactly what they were doing. The flight then continued northwest. disappearing entirely once it left the radar's range. For investigators, this revelation raised a chilling question. If the plane didn't crash right away, where did it go for the next several hours? Attention soon turned to the plane's satellite communication system, known as SATCOM. Even though the aircraft had vanished from radar, this system occasionally sent automated handshakes to a satellite operated by Inmarsat, a British company. By analyzing these signals, investigators discovered that Flight 370 had remained in the air for nearly 7 more hours after its transponder went dark. These handshakes didn't reveal the exact position, but they did show the distance between the plane and the satellite at different times. When plotted on a map, these distances formed a series of arcs across the globe, each representing a possible location where the plane might have been during those final hours. Using fuel estimates, speed, and flight path modeling, experts concluded that the aircraft most likely followed a southern route, deep into the Indian Ocean. This region was one of the most remote places on Earth, thousands of kilometers from any landmass or radar coverage. It was here, along the 7th and final arc, that investigators believed Flight 370's journey ended. The search operation shifted accordingly, now led by the Australian government. For the first time, the world had a new theory. The plane didn't fall near its departure point. It flew for hours into the open sea, far from where anyone had been looking. Teams of ships equipped with advanced sonar, underwater drones, and scanning technology began mapping the ocean floor, an area covering more than 120,000 square kilometers. The seabed was rugged, mountainous, and unlike any previously explored. Each day, the ships returned with data and images of the dark ocean floor, but not a single trace of the Boeing 777 appeared. For months, crews listened for the faint signal of the aircraft's black box beacons, which were designed to transmit underwater for up to 40 days. Weak signals were detected at one point, giving hope that the wreckage was near. But after weeks of scanning, nothing was found. The signals were later dismissed as unrelated. The mystery deepened. How could a modern airliner with redundant communication systems and GPS tracking simply vanish in the age of satellites and surveillance? Families demanded answers. Governments grew frustrated. Aviation experts, investigators, and scientists debated endlessly over what could have gone wrong. But without physical evidence, every explanation was speculation. The ocean, vast and indifferent, kept its secrets. Then, more than a year later, the first piece of the puzzle washed ashore. On July 29, 2015, beach cleaners on the island of Réunion, east of Madagascar, discovered a large metallic object coated in barnacles. It was identified as a flaperon, the trailing edge of an aircraft's wing. The serial markings confirmed what the world had long feared. It belonged to Flight 370. For the first time, there was proof that the aircraft had indeed crashed somewhere in the Indian Ocean. In the following months, more fragments began appearing along the coasts of Africa and nearby islands. A piece of the wing, part of an engine cowling, and even parts of the cabin interior. Each discovery confirmed the same grim truth. Flight 370 had gone down in the ocean, but the exact location of the wreckage remained unknown. Despite years of effort, multiple searches, and over $150 million spent, the main wreckage has never been found. Investigators were left with satellite data, fragments of metal, and a haunting timeline that suggested a deliberate act. Still, none of it could answer the most important question: why? The search had uncovered evidence of the plane's final path, but not its final moments. Somewhere, in the depths of the Indian Ocean, the truth of Flight 370 was still waiting to be found. Even with years of investigation, hundreds of experts, and mountains of data, the disappearance of Flight MH370 remained a mystery that refused to be solved. The physical evidence was scattered, incomplete, and silent. There were no black box recordings, no final transmissions, and no definitive signs of what had gone wrong. All that remained were theories, each one trying to explain how a modern airliner could vanish without a trace in an age of constant surveillance. One of the earliest theories suggested a catastrophic fire on board. investigators learned that the cargo hold contained a large shipment of lithium-ion batteries, known to overheat and ignite. A fire of that nature could have filled the cockpit with smoke, disabling instruments and knocking out communication systems. It was possible, some believed, that the pilots turned back toward Malaysia to attempt an emergency landing. But if that was the case, why didn't they send a distress signal? And how could a fire burn long enough to disable every system but still allow the plane to fly for nearly 7 more hours? Another possibility was depressurization. If the aircraft suddenly lost cabin pressure at 35,000 feet, everyone on board would have been unconscious within minutes. The plane could have continued flying on autopilot until it ran out of fuel and crashed into the ocean, just like Helios Airways Flight 522 in 2005. This theory explained the eerie silence after takeoff and the lack of communication, but it didn't explain the deliberate course changes. Someone had turned the plane west. Then South Autopilot alone couldn't do that. Attention eventually turned toward the cockpit. In 2016, leaked documents revealed that Captain Zaharieh Ahmad Shah had practiced a flight route on his personal simulator that ended in the southern Indian Ocean, eerily similar to MH370's final path. Many took this as evidence of premeditation, suggesting Zahari might have intentionally diverted the flight. Yet investigators were careful not to jump to conclusions. There was no suicide note, no evidence of mental instability, and no indication of personal or financial troubles. His colleagues and family described him as calm, professional, and passionate about flying. If this was deliberate, his motive remained invisible. Other theories ventured into darker territory. Some claimed the aircraft was hijacked by terrorists or taken over remotely using military technology. Others proposed that it was accidentally shot down during a secret military exercise and covered up by the nations involved. Fringe theories even suggested that the satellite data had been fabricated and that debris found years later was planted to support a false narrative. None of these claims were ever supported by concrete proof, but in the absence of answers, conspiracy filled the void. In 2018, Malaysia released its final official report. The findings confirmed that the disappearance could not have been caused by a mechanical failure alone. The aircraft's systems, transponder, communication, navigation had been deliberately turned off or disconnected. However, the investigators also admitted that they could not determine by whom or why every possible scenario — fire, hijacking, pilot action, depressurization — was plausible, yet none fit perfectly. The report ended with a line that summarized years of confusion and heartbreak. The cause of the disappearance cannot be determined with the evidence available. What makes MH370 so haunting is not just that it disappeared, but how completely it did. Despite billions spent, cutting-edge sonar, satellites, and submarines, no wreckage field has ever been located. For aviation experts, it's a riddle that defies logic. For the families of those on board, it's an open wound that refuses to close. Every year, new claims surface, new fragments appear, and new theories circulate. But the truth remains somewhere beneath miles of cold, dark ocean. More than a decade later, Flight MH370 still represents the limits of human understanding in the age of technology. A machine built to connect continents simply vanished into silence, leaving behind data, fragments, and grief, but no certainty. Maybe the answer lies in a part of the ocean we haven't yet searched. Or maybe, like the passengers it carried, it has become part of the deep itself. No one knows where Flight 370 came to rest, or what truly happened in its final hours. All we know is that it left the world with one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of our time. A reminder that even in an age of satellites and endless information, some stories still disappear into the void.